Rockets fans, welcome to the Rockets Launch Pod, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets. Whoa! Sports Talk 790. Rockets! Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Rockets Launch Pod starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome back to another new episode of the Rockets Launch Pod presented by Clutch Fans. I'm Ben DuBose. He's Paulo Alves. We're your host, and let's get right to it off the top. This is going to be a little bit of a downer because your Houston Rockets are now down 2-0 to the shorthanded Los Angeles Lakers, missing their two leading scorers in Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves, with the series shifting back to Houston this weekend. This has gone as poorly as it reasonably could. This was a matchup where if you listen to our previous pod, we were excited about it. The Rockets were excited about it, drawing the Lakers instead of the Nuggets, particularly given the Lakers' injuries. But even without them, the Rockets and most people around the NBA viewed the Lakers as their most friendly potential matchup among the realistic options. The Nuggets and Minnesota Timberwolves were also in there. And so even if all teams were at full strength, I think the Rockets would have preferred this matchup. And now you take out Luka, you take out Reeves. Certainly there was a lot of excitement inside the building. The final day of the regular season when the Nuggets inexplicably beat the Spurs and kept the Lakers at 4. There was a lot of excitement from us on the pod. And then to go out to LA and lose not 1, but 2. Folks, the Rockets are the clear underdogs in this series. Even if they have a talent advantage, historically, teams that go up 2-0 in a best-of-7 series win more than 90% of the time. So even if you don't think the Lakers are truly above 90% in terms of their series win probability at this point, it's far better than 50-50. That's just being real.
Yeah, and LeBron is 32-0 and he's up 2-0 in the series.
Yeah, and he's been excellent. You do have to tip your hat to him. But I just think the way it's happened, if it was just game 1 with Kevin Durant not playing because of the bruised knee he suffered at practice last week, it would be a little disconcerting in that long term, how does it make you feel that you're this dependent on a 37-year-old Kevin Durant? I could see if the Rockets bounce back in game 2, just chalking up game 1 to hashtag Houston Sports. Some really bad luck happened with KD in practice after he was healthy all season, and you move on and you get back to the form you were in to close the regular season when the Rockets finished 9-1 their last 10 games to get back to 52-30, same record as a year ago. But Paulo, KD came back in game 2 and they were just as bad, if not worse. The shooting didn't get any better other than KD, who did make his shots. The turnovers were worse because KD was not prepared to attack the double teams that the Lakers sent to him. And in both of these games, Paulo, the story is offense. The Rockets have not broken 100 points in a game this series. To put that in perspective, the lowest 2 scoring offenses in the entire NBA this season, the Brooklyn Nets and Milwaukee Bucks, averaged about 106 and 110 points per game. The Rockets have yet to reach 100 in this series. So we can talk all day about the Lakers missing Luka and Reeves and not being as high-powered as they usually are. If you're not scoring 100 points, you're probably not beating anybody. And the Rockets aren't scoring 100 points. I think they're averaging 96 or something close to that. So you can, and I'm sure we will today, quibble over exactly where the blame should go, how much of it falls on Ime Udoka, in terms of the rotation choices and the tactical strategies the Rockets are employing, how much of it goes to the players simply not executing, KD with the turnovers, Alperen Şengün, Reed Shepherd not making shots at a nearly high enough level for what they're capable of. You can point the finger at Rafael Stone from a roster construction perspective. Do they have enough ball handling? Do they have enough shooting? There are different areas of blame, and reasonable people can disagree over what percentage goes to what entity. But I think the bottom line, what we should acknowledge off the top, this is the type of series, if it continues down this path to where not only the Rockets lose, at this point, it's just as likely that they could lose in 4 or 5 games somehow than they actually win the series. If it continues down this path, this is the kind of result that can change careers. And I don't know, is it players on the team? Is it coaches? Is it executives? I personally think executives are the least likely, but, reasonable people can disagree. Same principle as assigning blame. But when you get this matchup, this can change a lot of things in the big picture, because I think for most of the second half of this season, and especially when the Rockets closed the regular season strong, got back to 52-30, we had sort of coalesced, Paulo, around the idea that, hey, the Rockets have shown enough, and they did show some mental fortitude. Maybe they'll do that again the next few days. We can't rule it out. But I think we had seen enough to where we would have largely been okay, even if it was underwhelming, largely running it back and hoping that Fred VanVleet, Steven Adams, maybe a return to health for Dorian Finney-Smith, some moves around the margins, and basically have next year being a more complete version of this year's team. Well, things changed when you drew the Lakers. Last pod, they changed in a good way because we were talking about, the higher expectations that hopefully the Rockets could at least win a round in the postseason for the first time since 2020. But with those expectations comes a downside risk. And if you fall short, especially if you fall short in an embarrassing way, which losing in a sweep or gentleman's sweep would be, I mean, that's the kind of, perfect storm scenario where all of a sudden some bigger picture changes, be it the players, the coach, whoever, are suddenly back in play. So I just want to acknowledge that off the top. I feel like the last couple of months, Paulo, me and you, we've sort of downplayed the idea that the Rockets have to do anything drastic this offseason. This is the perfect storm where they might. Like, if they had drawn the Denver Nuggets and gone out in 4 or 5 games, it would have been very frustrating, but I think it would have been easier to sort of just tip your hat and say, they're just better. That's a really good team. No disrespect to the Lakers, but they should not be winning. And it's not just that they're winning with ease. The Rockets have led for, I feel like, a couple of minutes at most in the second halves of both Game 1 and Game 2. The Lakers have clearly been in the advantage position. So it's not like the Rockets are doing something catastrophically wrong. No, the Lakers are just clearly the better team to this point in the series. JJ Redick has his team more prepared than Ime Udoka. At least it looks like that to me. So this is the kind of result when comparing the rosters, when comparing, when looking back at the optimism that we all had, including the two of us a week ago. This is the kind of result where if it continues, it can change a lot, not just now, but into the coming months.
Yeah, I'm 100% there with you. I think people are typically used to us being a little bit more moderate in our commentary. I think this podcast might surprise a few people as we move forward. This series has just been a disaster from every angle you could possibly analyze it from. And it's not looking up for it to get better, because I think after 2 games, it's established that at the very least, these teams, as currently constructed, are on even footing, even with the injuries. It's seen, and the Lakers do still have a home court advantage. Even if you do win the next 2 games, you're then facing a scenario where you have to win one away, and you weren't able to win one away when Luka and Reeves weren't there. Luka doesn't seem to be coming back, but how are you going to win with Reeves there in a game 7 or in a game 5? Because you do have to steal a win, and the Rockets are a lot better at home, and they might be able to level the series. But even then, what would possibly lead you to be confident that they would be able to pull an upset when they weren't, when the Lakers were a lot weaker? And then when you think about it, just looking at the teams, right? Let's forget the huge talent discrepancy. And we'll get about why that talent discrepancy doesn't show as much, but let's just look at the reasons the Rockets' offense doesn't work. And we'll get into overarching, moving into the future talk, in a little bit, but just for now, for strategy for this series itself, seems like a big part of the problem is that the Rockets can't shoot. And the big part of the problem why the spacing isn't there is because Amen and Alperen Sengun both can't shoot. And then the other big part of the problem, at least talking point wise, is oh, Reed can shoot, but he can't defend at all, so you can't play him either. And let's look at the mirror side of this with the Lakers. The Lakers are playing Jarrett Vanderbilt, who can't shoot. DeAndre Ayton can't shoot. That doesn't seem to all of a sudden make their offense completely dysfunctional. And let's not pretend like LeBron's a walking mismatch and he's scoring 40 a night. He's not. And then the mirror side for Reed Shepard, Luke Kennard's getting plenty of minutes. How are the Rockets not able to exploit that on the offensive end? How is Luke Kennard playable? So even if you want to, get a little bit to the nitty-gritty of things, and most people will point out that the biggest issues with the Rockets are that, well, their shooters, mainly Reed, can't defend, and that two of their star pieces, or at least two pieces of the rotation, can't shoot, and therefore you can't build an offense that works because those two guys can't shoot. And then I'm not going to argue that point. That's, once again, talked for later on in the pod when I'm going to make some overarching takes on team building and how this roster moves forward. But you can't say that the things that are ailing the Rockets don't apply just as much for the Lakers. It just, at the end of the day, comes down to, first problem, you don't have a guy that can just create offense out of nothing, besides Kevin Durant. But the Lakers also have just one guy that can do that, in LeBron, and it doesn't seem like applying the Lakers strategy with KD to LeBron with the Lakers, that doesn't seem to work. And yes, LeBron is a much better passer than KD is, but once you're double teamed, getting out of it is not, doesn't require some insane playmaking chops. It's mostly a team-based thing, right? For your team to be able to punish when that's happening. And then you look even defensively at the rest of the Lakers team. Vanderbilt's a good defender. I'm not going to take that away from him. LeBron at this age is not a great defender. Rui Hachimura is not a great defender. DeAndre Ayton himself is not a good defender. Like, that was legitimately the reason why he was considered a toxic asset as a max guy, because he's not a good defender. And then obviously Luke Kennard's not a good defender. Like, it doesn't make sense for anybody looking at this series for it to be playing out the way that it is. And as you said, and if we want to use this to kind of segue into some broader discussion topics, this is the type of embarrassment that changes and that forces major changes in a franchise, whether that be from a strategy from the front office perspective, or new people there, or coaching, or and there's levels to it, right? There's the front office level, there's pressuring the front office to be more, I guess,
decisive.
Yeah, or bold. I was going to go with bold. And there's changing people in the front office. There's scales to it, right? At the lower level, you pressure them into being bolder. At the higher level, you change people. And then at coaching, there's two sides of it. There's firing Ime Udoka, or there's bringing a guy in to be an offensive coordinator and have full control over what the offense looks like. And from the player's perspective, there's levels to it. There's hoping Fred and Steven Adams can change it, and I don't think that's going to cut it anymore. Beyond that, there's spending picks in a superstar trade, or there's trading guys that you thought were untradeable up to this point, like Alperen Sengun, for example. We're going to get into that later. But this level of embarrassment, I hope, and my fandom will be in question if it doesn't, because I've said plenty of times before in this podcast, the only thing that could possibly lose me as a fan is not having faith in a front office. Because if you don't have faith in the people making the decisions and you don't have a path, then to me there's no point in watching sports. That's why I could never be a fan of a team like the Kings, for example, not necessarily because of the success, but because of the having a clear path forward, like the Sabonis Haliburton trade, which I'm sure we'll get into later. Like, that as a fan will drive me nuts. It drove me nuts in the moment. There's no path. So if the Rockets don't make a drastic move, if this series ends as it seems like it's going to end, then I will start bringing that into question as well. It's just, if something like that happens, like, this is the type of thing that will make your organization lose respect around the league. This is the type of thing that players will be talking about years down the line. You know how the John Wall, this shit's ass quote is all over everywhere. And then there's him appearing on podcasts talking about how dysfunctional the team was back then. And obviously he has some personal motives to say stuff like that. Obviously, he was never the same thing, and maybe that's how he copes with it. But I can very easily see KD, for example, in 3-4 years going on a podcast after retiring and saying, "Hey, remember that Houston team? Remember that burner stuff? Now that I can talk about it, yeah, it was real, and you can see that the stuff I was saying, I was actually right about, and bad mouthing the organization or decisions made or on-court decisions made or players back on this team. Like, this would be the type of debacle that hurts the perception of the team around the league, which is terrible. The Rockets are a pretty respected franchise all in all. And it's the type of thing that will become kind of NBA folklore, or if you want to call it like that. Like, remember the time the Rockets lost to the Lakers while missing 70%, not 70%, like 60% of their cap? The one time LeBron, the 40, like, you'll be known as the team 41-year-old LeBron carried a bunch of scrubs over in his 41 year, like, all-time GOAT debates will mention the Rockets in this light. Like, this is a massive, massive, scandalous embarrassment of a performance if it does happen, if it does end up happening, which is, it's looking very likely that it will. And so, you know, I'll use this to set up Ben's rant a little bit, which is...
Well, wait a minute on that. So I want to address very quickly the next two games and stick with the micro, because I really don't think a major adjustment is coming. I think it's pretty clear. What we should remind people, the Rockets and the Lakers haven't just played twice. They have played 4 times in barely over a month. They had the 2 games on March 16th and 18th in Houston. Now, they had Luka, the Lakers that is, and they had Reeves as well, but those are not defensive difference makers. And in those games, especially the first one, it felt very similar to these 2 playoff games in that the Rockets looked hopeless down the stretch. They couldn't figure out what they wanted to do out of the Kevin Durant double teams. KD also had some baffling turnovers, so he deserves some blame as well, even if he's scoring at an efficient level. And so with that in mind, like, the Lakers are a different team on offense without Luka and Reeves, but defensively, they might even be a little bit better. So in terms of how the Rockets are finally going to get the offense on track, I don't think there's going to be any radical changes in terms of, you know, team strategy. I think it's pretty clear that they have a certain way that they think this offense and these players can run. And if they haven't done it in a sample of 4 games within the last month, I don't know that one practice on Thursday before Friday night's game 3 is going to lead to some radical changes in terms of how they play. Now, maybe they make some rotation tweaks. Maybe Reed Shepherd plays more and the Rockets choose to just live with the defense. I don't know. It should be noted, by the way, that Reed has not shot the ball well offensively at all. So for all of those discussions, he needs to make the open shots that he's getting, although they have been limited to this point. Like, there are things you can do around the margins like that, but I don't think you're going to see the Rockets, from a tactical X's and O's perspective, do something radically different. I think at this point, they're attacking the J.J. Redick defenses the way they're going to attack them moving forward. And if there's any source for hope, I guess you can point to, you know, the old NBA adage that role players shoot better at home. The Rockets have shot terribly. The Lakers have shot pretty well. Maybe that changes in Houston. The Rockets are 30-11 at home this season, but I mean, even if it does change, number one, it's ridiculous that it takes that against an undermanned Lakers team. Secondly, even if you win both of these games this weekend, you still have to win either a Game 5 or a Game 7 in LA, at least one of them, to win the series. So even if the shot luck does turn around at home and, you know, maybe, you know, the one bit of good offense the Rockets have had in fourth quarters against the Lakers, I would say that second game in March, Şengün came back from injury and played pretty well. And in these 2 games, I think Şengün's been a little timid because he hasn't had the touch near the rim. Maybe if Şengün has more shots go in early in the game, he becomes more aggressive, decisive, and clinical in fourth quarter situations as the lead guy out of the 4-on-3s that Durant generates. I mean, that's the hope, but I don't think there's going to be any sort of radical change. I know there's some frustrations with the Rockets sort of allowing the double to come at KD as opposed to using him off ball. I mean, at this point, we've seen it for a lot of this season, and we've seen it 4 times against the Lakers. All of those games have been competitive in the fourth quarter. We've seen it 4 times in barely over a month. So be it for, limitations of the roster, choices from the coaching staff, roster construction, whatever you want to attribute it to, I don't think there's going to be anything that radically changes this weekend. I think in terms of, the Rockets somehow winning a couple of games, well, you got to win one just to send the series back to LA, and hopefully both to tie the series and make it a best of 3. I think you just got to hope that the shots go in, certainly from 3-point range, but also Şengün making more shots near the rim, getting more confident. Maybe Ime gets a friendlier whistle on his drives. I don't know. That's all I can point to, Paulo, in the micro. I know you want to talk macro, and I do as well, in terms of team building, what it means moving forward, but I just think in terms of the micro, I would not expect any radical changes. I think you just got to hope that some of the shots that didn't go in LA do go in for you in Houston, right?
Yeah, 100%. I'm with you. Some of it comes down to the Rockets not being able to shoot and some magnet ball, especially in game 1 from the Lakers. Typically, and there's a bunch of stats out there if you want to look them up, a team winning the possession battle by 40-something possessions over 2 games typically is not going to lose the game if they can make shots. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like the Rockets are generating great looks and just missing. I just don't see, I was the guy that predicted 4-0, and that's not an L on me. I don't see this team, if they didn't do it up to this point, being able to take a game off the Lakers in game 5 or game 7 while holding all of the home games. I'm actually confident that they'll hold the home games just because they play much better at home. But I don't think they'll be able to take one on the road against the Lakers, especially because it's only going to get tougher with the Reeves coming back and potentially Luke, although that's looking unlikely. And even then, this cannot be missed within the discussion. Even then, even if the Rockets lose in 7, and it's a respectable loss, I guess it's not a gentleman's sweep, that's not a respectable loss. You were massive favorites going into the series. This is a heavily injured Lakers team. There's no coming back from this unless you win the series. The only way to wash this all away is winning the series. And to me, that just looks insanely unlikely. You talked about the percentages, the 90% teams going up 2-0. I talked about, it's that plus it's a LeBron team. They're not going to relax. And so I just don't see that happening. And with that not happening, even if KD stayed hurt, that still would not be an excuse, right? It's a massive indictment on the young core that even without KD, they're not able to beat this Lakers team. And it throws me back to last season where a lot of the time we were heavily relying on Dillon Brooks' hero ball to win games and to score. And it turns out that Dillon Brooks' offense was actually somehow masking how bad our offense actually was as well. So this just signals heavy problems with the young core, and we'll get into it, in a way that barely losing, or if KD didn't play a single more game in this series and we lost, that still wouldn't, I guess, mellow it out. It's a catastrophic franchise-altering event to lose the series, especially the way it is. We talked about last week that the Rockets got a massive break, and that the fact that they were likely going to win against the Lakers could mask some hard decisions that might have been needed to be made had they drawn the Nuggets and just lost in round 1. Well, it turns out that there's the other edge of that knife, which is, well, if you do lose a free series, what everybody thought was a free series, then that slam dunk determines that you need to make major changes, and you can't go the let's hold out and keep flexibility and optionality route any longer.
Yeah, and let's turn our attention to the macro, because if this series ends, as I think we're both increasingly resigned to think that it will, there's going to be at least one major change, and maybe major changes plural. I just can't see the Rockets running it back if they go out in 4 or 5 games, hell, maybe even 6 or 7, to this version of the Lakers when you consider the excitement they had at drawing this team in the playoffs. I'm sure they won't commit to it in the press conference after the series. They'll say they want to keep their options open and they'll evaluate. Well, just as last offseason, there was a lot of lip service about Jalen Green after that Warriors series, and we saw what happened a month later when a market opportunity magically came about. I think the same could be true this year. Now, my personal opinion, if I had to rank in order of, what's most likely to happen and what's least, I would say a major change to the roster is most likely. In between would be the coaching staff, at least to the head coach. Now, maybe, the staff beneath Ime Udoka, maybe that would go, 1A, 1B along with the roster. And then least likely would be the front office, at least in terms of Rafael Stone and Eli Whitus. I think you're least likely to see major movement on that front. And one thing I want to address off the top on Ime Udoka, because I do think some of the arguments have been mischaracterized, and we've addressed this point in previous pods. So there's some talk out there that Udoka's safe because of the contract extension. That might be true, but I think it's less about the money. And Paulo, you made this point a few weeks ago. It's less about the money in the contract and more about what the contract represents. And I think that's important to understand because I think we can both agree. Ime Udoka has been underwhelming this season. And I think at the end of this playoff run, whether it ends in a few days or somehow goes on to at least the second round, barring something crazy, we're going to look back at this season and say, even with the injuries, Ime Udoka left us wanting more. And that's the most generous interpretation I can give. Relative to the first 2 seasons where Ime clearly did more right than wrong, this year doesn't feel that way. There are understandable reasons for the frustration. And so a lot of the pushback nationally has been, the Rockets aren't going to make a coaching change because they gave Ime this big contract last offseason. It's not that Tillman Fertitta is going to stick with a coach he doesn't believe in simply because he doesn't want to eat the contract and be paying 2 coaches for the next few seasons. I don't think it's that. If the Fertittas clearly see a coach out there that they believe in more and that they think could unlock more from this roster, it's possible, especially if the Rockets go out sad to the Lakers. Like, I've dismissed all that talk in the past. I still think it's very unlikely, but anything is on the table if you go out the way things have looked the last few games. This is sort of the perfect storm scenario. With that said, the reason... Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out before you move on from Udoka that there's something to be said for the fact that Ime Udoka's success, both early on with the Rockets and with the Celtics, came from having top-tier coaching staffs with it that produced, head coaching candidates later on. Back with the Celtics, obviously Will Hardy, obviously Mazzulla, just stacked coaching staff back then. Now with the Rockets for the past few seasons, obviously Ben Sullivan was highly regarded. Royal Ivy was, highly sought after. And, Thiago Splitter, who is right now the head coach, interim, but head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers, who took a team that was shaken by a huge gambling scandal and, turned that young team into now a play-in team that's tied 1-1 in a series with the Spurs, regardless of whether Wemby had to go out injured or not. So maybe Ime Udoka is a good tip of the spear type of guy, good leader, but needs, the coaching staff to enable him to be that guy and not be lackluster in other parts of, whether it be player development, whether it be offensive coaching. And even defensively this season, it seemed like the Rockets don't have the same power they had last season defensively, off some of that personnel. But this to say, argument to be made that, as you were saying, it's not just about the contract. It's also about, you're not going to make a move for the sake of making a move. You got to have a guy out there that you believe would be better than Udoka, right? And you could think, hey, It might make more sense if there's not a better candidate out there that's better than Udoka. It might make more sense to invest in getting an offensive coordinator type because Ime Udoka has been very successful when he's had stacked coaching staff.
And where I was going with the contractual angle, it's not the money in a vacuum. It's what the decision represents. They did not have to give him that contract extension last offseason. He was 2 years into the original 4-year deal. They easily could have waited until this offseason. They did it early because that's how much they believe in him. There was confirmed interest from the New York Knicks, one of the glamour franchises in the NBA, in hiring Ime for their open position. The Rockets could have not only gotten out of the contract, they could have gotten additional compensation, be it financially, draft picks. The Knicks were after Ime Udoka. It was widely reported at the time. The Rockets rebuffed them. So I just have a tough time seeing in under a year the Rockets going from not only believing in Ime Udoka, but committing to him long-term when they didn't have to, rejecting assets from another team and the opportunity to, start fresh if that's what they wanted, to then being ready to part ways. This season has been bad, don't get me wrong, at least relative to expectations. I don't think, even with a loss to the Lakers, it gets quite to that level, especially when, and now let's look at the bigger picture, there are some extenuating circumstances. Like, I'm not going to tell you how much blame should go to each entity in terms of players versus coaches versus front office. I think reasonable people can disagree. But I think where there should be some agreement is the idea that there is blame to go around at every level. It's not 100% on the coaching staff or the players or the front office. And so when you look at how we got to where we are, and I put up a thread on Blue Sky where my handle is at DuBose on Wednesday morning, my initial thoughts, sleep-deprived thoughts after Tuesday's game 2, I talked about how just at a high level, we talk about the struggles offensively. It's really tough when 2 of your 3 best players in the modern NBA both can't shoot. And that's the case with Amen Thompson and Alperen Sengun. And in game 1, when there was no Kevin Durant, literally your 2 best players. Defensively, we've talked about this ad nauseum. Alperen Sengun and Reed Shepherd. That's a tough fit for any coach to make that pairing work on the defensive end, especially with Reed in year 2 at 21 years old. Stylistically, for Ime Udoka, I think there's a case to be made, at least based on what we saw from him his first couple of years in Houston and certainly in Boston. Sengun and especially Reed, it's a little bit of an odd mix for how he usually wants to play. Like, this is not a loaded roster, and it's not necessarily an Ime Udoka roster. Ime was a guy who his first season in Houston, I think he would love to spam three-pointers. It's just this roster doesn't lend itself to that. Defensively, I think he would love to be more physical and to switch more. This roster doesn't lend itself to that. And then with Sengun specifically, you've talked about it a lot, Paulo. There's been a huge drop-off defensively between last season and this season. The data shows it. It's not exclusive to the playoffs. It didn't randomly happen. It's been going on for months. So the roster isn't perfect in terms of what Rafael Stone gave Ime Udoka to work with. And then the players themselves, just in terms of executing and winning their matchups, Alperen Sengun, as an all-star, is not delivering on both ends of the court at the level that he did a year ago. And so that's not to absolve Ime of blame. Like, you can maybe argue that, for example, offensively, Sengun and Reed are just so talented that, the trade-offs defensively are worth it. And maybe if you commit to playing Reed, what he gives you from a spacing and a ball handling perspective can offset some of the issues that you have with Amen and Sengun together. I don't know that, but maybe Ime should be more open to experimenting along those lines. But it's a maybe. Like, there are no answers that you can point to and say this is a silver bullet solution. And so one of my frustrations with the front office, and I could go on for hours. I won't do that here. I'll try and be concise. It doesn't feel like there's been a ton of conviction the last couple of seasons. Like you had a tweet I saw after game one, Paulo, when it looked like Amen was probably the Rockets' best player. Why don't the Rockets just do 5-out spacing and give Amen Thompson the room he needs to get downhill and attack the basket? The Rockets love Amen Thompson. Every conversation I've had with the front office, they want to get him more involved offensively. They want to see him more aggressive, especially late in games. Well, it's difficult to do that when the court is cramped. If you really believe in Amen to that level, should you not be building your roster around him? Or if you think that Şengün and Reed are just that special as offensive players, maybe you just play them no matter what and live with the defensive trade-off. You just give them every opportunity to get, more seasoning, and maybe you're in a better position to live with their defensive warts by the playoffs, because clearly they didn't get a ton of exposure in the regular season. It feels like the Rockets have sort of split the difference in a lot of their decision-making with the current roster. And it hasn't always been that way. Like, I don't want to say it's a huge indictment of Patrick Fertitta and Rafael Stone because, to start off this rebuild, they talked about pain tolerance during the tanking years. They had more pain tolerance than a lot of organizations. They did some unconventional things. And lately, with James Harden playing well in the playoffs for the Cavaliers, there's been a lot of revisiting the Fred VanVleet over James Harden decision in the summer of 2023, that initial free agency with Ime Udoka. I mean, that was a bold move to go with Fred, who's clearly a lesser player than James, if you just look at them one-on-one, because you believed in the bigger picture blueprint with Fred, the overall puzzle that you're trying to put together. Like, that took a lot of conviction. And I'm not saying that they're right, but I can respect what they were trying to do. It feels like the last couple of years, there's been a lot of half measures to sort of, do the best they can to keep this group together and just hope that the talent wins out. The problem with that is that the talent just isn't that overwhelming. The Rockets, unfortunately, didn't come out of the rebuild with a Victor Wembanyama or a Cade Cunningham or even a Cooper Flagg level prospect. Like, there are limits to just how high this group's ceiling is. And if you're trying to be the last team standing out of 30, like, if you can't do it if you weren't lucky enough to draft a player that's just that transcendent and can potentially lift you almost by himself, then you've got to be more cutthroat, more clinical with how the rest of the roster fits together. We've talked about that in recent pods. You've got to, put more of a priority on chemistry and fit and how all the pieces work together. And you look at this roster, it just doesn't feel like that from an organizational perspective that's what happened. In fact, I know I've had conversations with people inside the building. They see the limitations with especially Şengün and Reed defensively and what that means for, the offensive end of the court when you can't optimize your system on that end because you're afraid of the trade-off defensively. I mean, they see that stuff as well. So that's why I struggle to put all of it on Ime Udoka, is because clearly I don't think it's a perfect roster. I don't think it fits. I don't think Şengün is playing nearly as well as he did a year ago. And so you combine all of that with the knowledge that less than a year ago, the Rockets were extremely high on Ime Udoka. I just struggle to see them saying that this year alone is enough to move them from being all in on Ime to all out. I could see this year, moving them, a little in the opposite direction to where maybe a year or two from now, they're more ready to make that move. I could certainly see this year being alarming enough to where they say, hey, like, we need to change the roster that we give to Ime. We need to work on fit to give him a better chance to succeed. And or maybe we need to give him a top shelf offensive coordinator the same way with Mike D'Antoni. You need to give him a top shelf defensive coordinator a few years ago in Jeff Bzdelik. I could see something like that, but I just don't think that this situation is so clearly top shelf. And I don't think you're going to see them move from one extreme to the other on Ime Udoka this quickly, especially when objectively there is a lot of blame to go around. I can't give you an exact number in terms of the percentage, but no, I don't think this roster is optimized from both the talent and a fit perspective. I don't think the pieces, no matter who the coach is, would be easy to work the way, at least at a championship level, the Rockets are trying to with Kevin Durant. Like, I do sympathize a little bit with, Rafael Stone and the not our year comments. Like, I'm understanding of why they didn't go after a Kobe White type of player at the trade deadline, because I don't think that, the types of moves that are needed to transform this situation, I don't think the guys who were available would do a whole heck of a lot. Maybe they help you steal a game from the Lakers, but are they really needle movers in the grand scheme? No. I think the bigger problem, and the front office does have blame, is that, the talent isn't overwhelming and the fit isn't ideal. And so they have blame. The players underachieving has blame. I talked about Şengün regressing defensively. Look, Reed Shepherd, I know he's year 2, but Stepan Castle is year 2, picked right after him, and he's going out and having a fantastic season for a 60-plus win Spurs juggernaut. I know they have Wemby, but Castle's been damn good. He's been better than Reed. Let's give him his flowers. At some point, you need to go out and execute. And, people can make the case in this series for playing Reed Shepherd more, and maybe they should, but Reed Shepherd's shooting terribly. Below 30% overall and from 3. He's gotten good looks. He's just not making them. So at some point, the players have to go execute. And that's why I'm not saying Ime Udoka is blameless. It's been an underwhelming year, but I think there are enough sources of blame to where I just struggle to see Rafael Stone and Patrick Fertitta going from as all in as they were as recently as last summer to saying, yeah, we want to do a total reboot and restart with a new coach, new system, start from scratch. That's why I tend to think that the players and the staff, those are the areas you're more likely to see changed, at least this offseason. And maybe with Udoka, maybe it lays the groundwork for something a year from now. Like, going into this season, there was no way in hell that Ime was going to get fired based on his track record going into the year. And I still feel that way. But coming off this year, if next year is underwhelming, yeah, maybe it lays the groundwork for that. But with this particular year, I just think both in terms of players and front office, there are enough other reasons for the substandard play that I don't think a head coaching change is in the cards.
I just think Udoka deserves a fair bit of the blame. Given very limited tools, JJ Redick has coached circles around him. Right, as I said before, let's not, the Rockets are underperforming, right? And you can blame that on the players. However, you can blame on the coach that he's not getting the performance out of underperforming players or out of the quality of players that he has that JJ Redick is doing with a lot less. And I do think that it's been clear as day that, the Lakers are generating points against what we think it was an underperforming for the whole year defense, but the stats say was the 6th best defense in the league or whatever it may be. With LeBron and a bunch of, low tier role players, he's manufacturing offense. And it's not just LeBron going hero mode every possession. And then on defense, he's managed to create a system or to make it up enough that the Rockets just can't produce offense against, even though he doesn't have good defensive players to work with. So he's been thoroughly outcoached this season. I don't think that's arguable in any stretch. I think what's arguable is that he was given the pieces to build a better team throughout the entire season. I think it's possible that he did the best with what he had, or not the best, but he did good with what he had. And at the same time, once the playoffs reached, he was thoroughly outcoached by a better coach, which is what JJ Redick has been these playoffs, or at least, and there's a lot of facets to coaching, right? There's the management of the group, leadership, there's X's and O's. JJ Redick is very clearly an X's and O's guy. And so I think that's that as far as coaching goes. Ideally, even when Udoka came in, remember way back when, I think we already had this spot going. We talked about the ideal thing would be Udoka and James Borrego at the time.
Yeah, and to close the loop on the Ime angle, I just think a lot of those X's and O's concerns on offense. So for starters, the playoffs are usually a situation where you're only as strong as your weakest link. And during the regular season, the Rockets had all those baffling losses, the late game collapses where things just went horribly wrong at the worst possible time. And I think what happened there during the regular season, it's just not realistic for teams to go all out and be super dialed in for 48 minutes every single game, 82 times in a period of 6 or so months. So they have to pick and choose their spots. But then when it matters most, which in the regular season is the fourth quarter, especially in spotlight type games, everybody hones in. And then the fact that the Rockets' deficiencies are just so glaring and so weak compared to other teams. And a lot of this is from a roster construction perspective. When you look at the Amen and Şengün's facing issues on offense, the Şengün and Reed pairing defensively, and then if you try and help out the spacing issues by playing Reed, then that leads to the defensive issues. There's just always something for opposing teams to exploit. And then in contrast to the regular season where teams are picking and choosing their spots, and it feels like suddenly the Rockets offense gets grounded to a halt when the opposing team locks in the playoffs, teams are more willing and able to lock in for the full 48 minutes because the games are way more important. And also in the first round, there's more time between games. And so I think that's why we're seeing the Rockets offense consistently look bad against the Lakers, whereas during the regular season, it was just at sporadic moments when teams would really dial it up defensively. And then we should also point out the ATO data, or after timeouts, which we've referenced before on this pod. So the Rockets continue to be really good at generating offense when they're organized, i.e. coming out of a timeout where they've got a clear plan and structure for what they want to do. I think we've seen elements of that this series with the Rockets starting off the first and third quarters relatively well. By far their best offense overall has come in the first quarter, and then they've at least briefly taken leads early in the third quarter of both game one and game two when they're able to map out a plan coming out of halftime. But then what seems to happen after that, the defense makes some adjustments, and then with the Rockets not having a true point guard or a floor general without Fred VanVleet, that's another super obvious weak link. It just doesn't seem like the Rockets are able to adjust to the adjustments or adjust on the fly, whatever you want to call it. But then just looking more broadly, in terms of Ime and the concerns over how his teams execute on offense, we knew this going in. Like, every coach has strengths and weaknesses. And so we knew when Ime took the job based on his track record in Boston, based on his conversations with the team, there's areas that he's more proven in. There's areas where he needs improvement. Even the last couple of years, offense has been an issue that at least at times in half court has been an issue for this team, even when they had Fred VanVleet, a so-called point guard. So I just think a lot of that was baked in. That's not to absolve Ime Udoka. That's just me sort of explaining why I think a lot of those warts were known when they redoubled their commitment to him as recently as June of 2025. And so I think there are areas of concern, but I don't think anything has changed so dramatically from this time a year ago that you would fire the guy, at least not right now. That's my point.
Yeah, I was mostly talking about from the distribution of the blame standpoint, which
Sure,
leads me to my
understood.
next
Just want to
point.
clarify.
Yeah, 100%. Which leads me to my next point. To me, and I can, I can say this with all of the letters. I don't think going forward, and this is, this is not based on 2 games. This is based on what we've seen offensively throughout the last 2 seasons. I do not think it is possible to build a contender in which you have Amen Thompson and Alperen Şengün with their current skill sets to build an elite team. I don't think it's possible. It's regression from Alperen Şengün. It's lack of progression from Amen shooting wise. I'm gonna focus this primarily on Şengün because KD said this, and it seems like very bare bones analysis, but it got me thinking, and it is true. There is not a single, and I asked a few people if they could name me one, there is not a good, positive impact role player, let alone star, that is both a bad defender and a bad 3-point shooter. There is none in the league. The last one people could bring to me was actually a star was Russell Westbrook. And his impact was arguable the entire time because of how inefficient he was. And how he restricted the way you built a team around him. Right? And so, to me, this is just a massive indictment on Şengün. And last season, it seemed like Şengün had taken a massive step forward defensively. Turns out, that's not what happened. Turns out, part of it was effort, yes, but a big part of it was also that he just had the perfect tools fit around him to build the defense that they built. And along with that, there was a change in refereeing. The league's calling more fouls now. They allowed more physicality last season, which I think helped defense in general as well. And so, knowing that, and knowing that you have to make a decision, to me, you have to make a decision this offseason between Aman Thompson and Alperen Şengün. And Aman Thompson has a lot of problems, but he's also got more upside, is more athletic, and is already elite at one thing, defense. At this moment in time, Şengün is not a good defender. At this moment in time, Şengün is not a good spacing threat or a spacing threat from the three-point line at all. At this moment in time, Alperen Şengün is not an efficient scorer at anything on the basketball court, especially in the playoffs. Over the past 2 seasons, and you can separate those 2 seasons individually, so you don't say that the sample is polluted by the last season. Şengün has been below average at his position as a scorer, not just from three-point shooting, as a whole. He has not been efficient inside the arc either. A lot of the craft that we saw him have in his early years, a lot of that magic, he seems to have cut down, streamlined his process to scoring, and still is not an above-average efficiency player. Because teams have studied him, because he's on the scouting report, whatever it may be, because of the spacing as well, I'm sure. But at this moment in time, Alperen Şengün is not a positive defender. He's not a positive outside shooting threat. He's not a positive inside shooting threat either. He's below average for his position. And I'll make the argument, and I think the argument can be very easily made, that he is not an efficient playmaker when you look at the NBA as a whole. He has barely got, I don't even know if he still has, a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. In the playoffs, it's been even worse. And this season, we've talked about it throughout the entire season, playmaking, like turnovers, have been a very real issue with him as well. And so right now, you tell me, what am I getting from Alperen Şengün? Right now, the negatives vastly outweigh the positives. And he's 23, and he can grow, and he's shown flashes in the past, but it's now been 2 seasons where he's not been a good offensive player, and 1 season where he's not been a good defensive player either. And so, and beyond that, he's not compatible with your next best, or best, depending on who you ask, young player, which is Aman Thompson, and highest upside by far. And so, it's what you said. It's what you talked about. There are no half measures anymore. You don't have the luxury anymore. The Rockets have been conservative. They have largely picked the expected picks in their when they had to make picks in the draft. There was never any huge surprise moments, except for perhaps trading up for Alperen Şengün. No bold moves. Always the expected guy. You can argue that they got unlucky and they didn't really have that much of a realistic chance to draft a true cornerstone, tip of the spear, shot creator, efficient type. Because for most people, taking Jalen Williams earlier would have been a reach. Reaching for, well, Evan Mobley wouldn't have been, but he's also not that much of a shot creator. But Scotty Barnes, for example, those would have been reaches at the spots that the Rockets had their draft picks. It's a combination of luck. It's a combination of also lack of that boldness that you talk about. Lack of, their boldest move was likely the move where they traded, as I said earlier in the pod, the move where they traded the Brooklyn picks for the Suns picks and delay that influx of draft capital by a year or two, perhaps reached more upside with it as well. But beyond that, they've been, for the most part, and we've heard this and we've talked about this for a really long time, and we thought it was the correct approach, they've been flexibility first. because they have been waiting for someone to break out as their true star before committing to a true, hey, this is who we're building around. Let's get the perfect role players to fit around these guys, or get the star that fits with these guys. KD is a one-size-fits-all star. He fits with anybody. 3-and-D role players like Dylan Brooks, like Dorian Finney-Smith, they fit with everybody. Even Fred VanVleet, someone who will fit with any team. They have been targeting Brook Lopez with someone who would largely fit with any team construct. What doesn't fit together is their own players, the guys that they're hoping hit that upside. And so to me, going into the offseason, my belief right now is that they should move on from Alperen Şengün. It might not be selling high on him, but I don't see a path forward with both Şengün and the men. And I think the more time you spend trying to make that happen, the more you're wasting both of their potentials. Because you could, if you truly believe Amen's the guy, you go ahead, you get 5-out spacing, or you get a pick and roll big and true spacing around that, and you try to make that work. If you want to somehow believe Alperen Şengün is the answer, then perhaps, and he doesn't need a guy like Amen Thompson to be viable defensively or passable defensively, then perhaps if you want to make that move, I wouldn't support it, but you go and you make that move. But yeah, I'll pass it off to you because I don't want to go on for too long.
Yeah.
To me, right now, the move is to move on from Alperen Şengün, and I can elaborate on the ways you could do that and what you could look for in trade package. But before, I want to give you a chance to talk about the players in general.
I tend to agree, and I want to wind down the pod because we're already over an hour in. We can revisit this more when the season ends, and at the moment, it looks like that'll be sooner rather than later. So we can table some of this for a week or two from now. But in addition to the points you raised about the awkward fit, and at a high level, I do think that Amen and Şengün, it's something that, especially since that the Spurs games in January and March, when we saw how one of your biggest rivals was able to exploit the limitations there, it's been something that I think is a nagging fear in the back of all of our minds. And combine that with what we're now seeing in the playoffs, and I think it's going to only become a greater talking point if the Rockets do, in fact, go out sad. So I don't really have too much else to say about the players. I would just also point out that if, in fact, this is the summer that the Rockets look to move on from Alperen Şengün and get a better fit next to Amen Thompson, you could also criticize the front office for being arguably a year too late. Because I do think that Şengün would have had greater value in 2025 than he will in 2026. He won't have bad value. Like, he's still a two-time All-Star. He's still a good player. Let's not get crazy. But the defensive limitations are real. And I think people around the league, in addition to seeing the regression from last year to this year, also know that the Rockets are a little more desperate. And so desperate teams don't always get the best value deals. Something needs to change here. And so you can argue that the Rockets, maybe if they were truly being clinical, should have sold high on Şengün a year ago when he looked much more passable defensively. With Jalen Green, you could argue that he might have had more value coming off that incredible run at the end of the 23 to 24 season if you moved on from him in the 2024 off season as opposed to waiting until 2025. I know he was a part of the Kevin Durant trade, but number one, KD was 37, and secondly, Jalen was in there largely as a salary matching piece. I don't think he was a key part of the trade, at least not super high level from an asset perspective. So you can argue that the Rockets, in addition to the fit questions being there for a while, have also been a little slow to act. Fans have noted a lot of these concerns. I've heard a lot of them behind the scenes as well. Like, they're not blind. They see many of the same issues that we're talking about on this show and other friends of ours are talking about on their Rockets podcast. It's just, when is the time to actually make the move and to take action? You can argue that in some cases, and perhaps Alperen Şengün, they've been a little bit late, and that affects the value you bring in and thus the product available for Ime Udoka to work with and to try and mold. That's not to absolve Ime Udoka. He, as you pointed out, Paulo, has plenty of blame. It's just, I think it's important context to remind folks that this is far from a perfect situation. It would be a lot easier if it was, a one size fits all and the Rockets could just change the head coach and all of a sudden everything is fixed and they're right back at the level they were a year ago when they were number 2 seed in the West. And we thought they were at least comparable to the San Antonio Spurs, at least in the short term. And now they're a tier behind at least. So that's why I bring up the backstory. It's not to pile on and it's not to, scapegoat Rafael Stone in the front office, because I think by and large, he's still done a very good job. I think they're wonderful with contracts. I'm not expecting anything on that front, and I don't think they should do anything on that front. I just bring up all of that to, explain how we got here and also why the problems run a lot deeper than just Ime Udoka. And some of it is simply the players need to go out and win their matchups and execute better. It's a complicated problem. It would be easy if there was a one-size-fits-all solution that could, overnight get you back to the level that you thought you were entering this season. I just don't think that's going to be there, at least from a coaching perspective. I don't think that's realistic. And so that's not meant to give Ime a pass. It's not meant to pile on with Rafael in the front office. It's just a reminder of the context and why my bet is between the coaching staff beneath Ime, maybe investing a little bit more, switching some things out, and certainly the roster. Like, I mentioned in the span of a year, it's unlikely for them to go from one extreme to the other on Ime Udoka in terms of their belief in him long-term. Because with a coach, you're ideally picking a guy that you want to run your team for 5, 10, 15 years. Like, you want that guy to be in alignment with your front office, ownership. He is the steward. He is the guy that you trust on a daily basis to run your program. And so in a perfect world, you're not going to, or anything close to a perfect world, you're not going to do a 180 in a span of a few months. Any change in terms of is he the guy or not there is likely to be more gradual. With the players, that's where, you can have one season sort of change, especially because some of these guys, Şengün's a home run of a pick at 16 overall. No matter what happens, that's still a win for Rafael Stone. But the fit was always a little flawed. Like, he's still the right pick because he's BPA, but sometimes, like, you just take BPA and you worry about the rest later. Like, views of individual players can be shaped by what happens in a given season. They can be shaped by the surrounding roster. And so, it's reasonable in a year to go from, maybe being in on Şengün to being out, or a year ago being in on Jalen to being out. That stuff can evolve. With a head coach, it's typically more gradual. Now, there can be, a tipping point where you go from being on the fence to saying, okay, it's not going to work out with this guy. But I just don't think the Rockets with Ime, because of all this context, will have gone from all in, believing that he's the guy wanting to, and not just wanting to, doubling down on their investment last offseason, to all of a sudden going to the complete opposite extreme when all these other things are wrong as well. I just think it's a lot more complex of a problem, which is unfortunate because a more complex problem is a little bit more difficult to fix. But I just think that's where we're at. And that's all I really have to say. There's more we can talk about from a roster perspective, but I'll table that until the series and the season is over. Paulo, before we shut off, is there anything else you wanted to say for today?
Yeah. As you said, I'll table, specific moves or specific avenues to move forward. And I'll just say something more high level, at least, in perhaps a little bit more emotional. Like, I think me, you, and a lot of Rockets fans are trying or are tired of pretending like what's obvious, fundamental to any basketball fan ever is actually going to change and coping with it, right? We've been hoping and praying that Alperen Şengün was going to be a good defender for a really long time. We've been hoping and praying that someone on this team would be a 1A superstar level talent, right? We have been hoping that Jalen Green would start being consistent. We have been hoping for a man in specific that he'd be a better shooter. I don't even feel it's fair to include a man in this because he's made great progress from season to season. So I'll exclude him. But we have been hoping that things would work out in the best way. And we had been hoping that two non-shooters at the center and the point guard position would work together. we have been hoping that the offense would get better. We have been hoping even this year, even defensively, that the defense would get better. When our eyes and our basketball principles have been telling us all along that these things typically don't work. We try to make all of the mental gymnastics around them. That perhaps Alperen Şengün can be a defender like Al Horford and not have to have that athleticism and just be really smart about where he is and have quick hands and impact the game defensively in that way. That's not real. We have been hoping that Alperen Şengün and Amen Thompson could space the floor with vertical spacing and passing gravity and opening cutting lanes because Şengün's a good passer. Listen, let's stop coping. The way you space in the NBA, fundamentally, the hardest thing to exploit is with 3-point shooting. Your two main guys can't shoot. That's an issue. One of your main guys, the center, that, call me old-fashioned, the center has to be a good defender, or at least a smart defender, or at least a passable defender, if he is a top 10 all-time guy like Jokic is, for example. That's an exception. Şengün is not Jokic. Şengün is not going to be Jokic. Let's stop coping. Let's stop pretending like Şengün can be Jokic and a man can be Aaron Gordon, and that's how those two fit, like it was the projection back then. That's just not the case. Şengün is not as good as Jokic, and so he can't get away with a lot of the stuff Jokic can get away with on the defensive end, and Jokic can shoot. Amen Thompson right now is not as good of a shooter as Aaron Gordon. So, even though he has a lot of the same characteristics, you can't put that together and pretend that that's how it's going to work. I'm just tired of being fooled by lightning in a bottle moments. I'm tired of hoping that stuff that historically seems unlikely is going to happen for us in specific. I'm tired of pretending like this is a new age NBA where you can get away with different types of archetypes and you can get away with different types of team construction. I'm tired of all of that. I want to get back to my basketball principles. I learned basketball through Daryl Morey's era. What you get a guy that can generate advantages consistently, and you get shooting and defense around them. If you want to be heliocentric, you have a guy that good. If you don't have a guy that good, you get two guys that can fit together, get interactions together, and play separate at the same time, ideally. And you surround those guys with shooting and defense. You can't have more than one non-shooter on a team. That's insanely hard to pull off. All of the good teams don't have that. Let's stop trying to take these one-off exceptional things that happen because these teams have exceptional players and hope that 1 in 1,000 chance is going to be what happens for us. Because I feel like that's what we've been doing the entire time. The entire rebuild has been seeing a flash and hoping that turns out to be the reality. And I'm tired of pretending like that's what's going to happen for us. We have to be pragmatic at some point. Şengün is not Jokic. Amen Thompson, for the foreseeable future, is not going to be a passable shooter. Even when he does, he'll likely start with catch and shoot. Before he can be a point guard and pull up, that might be even longer. So let's not rest or put all of the hopes of this team being functional offensively on guys developing things that would be absolute outliers for them to develop. That's my main takeaway from this. Let's stop selling ourselves on things to happen that have a very slim chance of happening or that only happen to all-time greats. Because not every prospect you draft is going to be the all-time great projection that they've got on them from very early on. So I think it's time to be pragmatic, and we'll talk about what that might mean in actual moves in the next spot. But in the meantime, I think it's just important that the fan base has this reality check, and that bubble is burst, that Şengün's not going to be Jokic. That one mostly in specific. If Jalen Green was still here, I would have said the same thing about him. He's not going to be MJ or Kobe or even Anthony Edwards, most likely. So it was good to hope that would happen and to have those really high highs when it looked like it might. It's just not. So let's be pragmatic and build a team that works and doesn't rely on 1 in 1,000 chances to obey to the very basic principles of modern basketball, like spacing, like switching and defense. Let's stop living in this pretend world.
Largely agree. And I'll just point out in closing, there are multiple paths the Rockets can go down. Like, people will link them to Giannis, and I understand why. I think the point of dispute would be the picks premium in addition to Alper and Şengün to go that route. But you also have the ability to, at least in the short term, to take a step back if you feel that you need to. The bar is super high right now. The Rockets clearly aren't at that top tier. Even though they have Kevin Durant, it was not an all-in move. As we've explained numerous times, they don't view him as that foundational in the grand scheme. They don't think he's been, well, I guess the last couple of games he's been foundational, but they see him as a very good, but even this season, still a flawed player when you look at especially the propensity for turnovers. They could take a step back. Then they have all these picks coming in, 2027, 2028, 2029, the 2 ones from Phoenix, the Brooklyn swap next year. We'll see what the revised lottery odds mean for the outlook on those. You could acquire more picks in that window and do something of a gap year if you feel you need it. You could also try to thread the needle. You could, I don't know, look for someone like an Anthony Davis who isn't a fit in Washington, and maybe it's a short-term upgrade if he's healthy, but because of the age and the contract, you also get a couple of draft picks that allow you to feel better about that longer term window as well. So you're trying to both bolster the short term with whatever's left of the Kevin Durant era, while also giving you a better chance down the road. That goes back to, trading not necessarily for a short term upgrade, the superstar acquisition of a Giannis, but maybe for a better roster fit or picks that you can utilize down the line, either for trades or to bring in players that are in better fit with the other surrounding pieces. So I'm in agreement with you, and we don't need to go too far down the road of hypotheticals today. That's just my own musings, but I think there are more options available to the Rockets than people around the league will think. I don't think it's going to be as simple as, oh, they're all in for Giannis, and that's the only path because they're pot committed with a 37-year-old Kevin Durant. I don't think you can rule it out, but I also don't think it's something that they feel they have to do by any means. All right, with that, we're done for today. For Paulo, I'm Ben. If you want to hear from us before our next episode, the best place to do that is on social media. My handle is at Ben DuBose. Paulo is at Paulo Alves NBA. This show is the Rockets Launch Pod presented by Clutch Fans. If you go to LaunchPod790 on Twitter/X, you have the link tree. That's got all the links you need to friends, partners, sponsors of the program. And as far as the next episode, it'll be next week. We hope with the series still going on against the Lakers, but if not, it could be over as early as Sunday if the Rockets get swept. Then we'll be back early next week to wrap up one of the most disappointing playoff exits in the history of the Houston Rockets. And even on down days like today, we appreciate you all so much for listening, and please come back soon for more.